Mark, would you like to do them or would you like me to do them?
If you could do the member introductions, I'll do the staff.
Okay.
Two-part harmony.
Chair,
I don't
we
have
are
the
live.
list in front of me.
We are live on Facebook.
Hey, well, it is bright and early at 7 a.m. and I'm going to call this Transportation Policy Board meeting to order. And it's June 9th, 2021. And we're going to start off with some introductions. Dina.
Yes, from the City of Olympia, please.
Danny Madrone, Olympia City Council.
Chair from Lacey,
Andy Ryder, Mayor of Lacey.
and from Tumwater. Oh, Mayor Kmet, you are muted.
Good morning. Hi, I'm Pete Kmet, representing Tumwater.
Great, and we also have our alternate from Tumwater.
Hi, Charlie Schneider, council member, City of Tumwater.
I am not seeing our county rep unless she came in.
She's trying to log in. She just texted me.
Okay, we'll get back to her. From the City of Rainier,
George Johnson, Rainier City Council.
from the City of Tenino.
John O'Callahan, representing the great city of Tenino.
Not seeing our representative from Yelm this morning yet. Circle back. North Thurston Public Schools.
Good morning, Deanna Maddox, North Thurston Public Schools.
Intercity Transit.
Don Melnick, Kansas City Transit Board Member.
The Port of Olympia.
Good morning, Joe Downing, Port of Olympia.
Our state government rep.
Good morning, Kevin Dragon with the Department of Enterprise Services.
Washington State Department of Transportation.
Don Lyons, Olympic Region Administrator.
Let's see, we have one business rep at this point. Renee,
Renee Radcliffe Sinclair, business rep.
our emeritus business rep.
Doug DeForest coming to you from beautiful Suncadia.
And let's start with our first community rep, Graham, our vice chair.
Graham Sackerson, vice chair and community rep.
And our other community rep, Kevin.
Kevin Fessinger, community rep.
Did I miss anyone or did anyone join us?
Carolina Mejia, County Commissioner.
Thank you. All right, Mark's going to handle staff introductions.
Okay. So from Olympia, we have Sophie Stimpson. From Thurston County, Matt Unzelman. From Tumwater, Mary Heather Ames. From Intercity Transit, Rob LaFontaine. And from TRPC, you've got me, the director, Mark Daly, Karen Parkhurst, Mina Tabbitt, Allison Osterberg, Berlina Lucas, Dave Reed, Sarah Porter, Paul Brewster, Aiden Dixon, and Katrina Van Every. And now I'm scanning real quick to see if anyone else joined while I was talking. I don't think so. So I think that's everybody.
Do you have any announcements, Mark?
I do. A couple of things. So one of the upsides of the past year from a rural transit perspective is since we weren't able to provide all the service that we normally would, simply because there wasn't all the same services to provide, especially the after school services, getting kids to and from after school programs. So there were some funds left over that we have put into making improvements to rural transit. And one of the things that we did was we updated the rider guide and we had that translated into Spanish. And then over the next week or two, we're going to be sending out postcards because one of the things that we found is there's still a lot of folks in our community that aren't fully aware of rural transit and what the service is, what it provides, how they can use it. And so we're sending postcards out to all the addresses along the rural transit routes to make sure that they know it's there, that it's fare free, and that points them to the website where they can plan their trips. We've done some improvements with a with a mapping tool that is improved for making so people can understand the routes, the times, connections to the other transit providers. And so that'll be going out in the next week or two. We're printing those out right now. And also, we've talked a bit about this. We're doing a very large push to for transportation priorities. We're trying to get as much input from everyone in the county that we possibly can. And so right now we are currently printing out thousands of postcards that'll be going out to all addresses in Thurston County to get people's input on our transportation system, how it's working for them, what kind of needs we have. And we're also using this as an opportunity to kind of test different outreach approaches. So we're starting by simply sending out these postcards that directs people to take an online survey. We're going to see what kind of response we get from that. How many people do we reach? Where are we missing folks? And then from there, we'll keep doing progressively more and different ways of outreaching the community so that we can start to test in this new world. What are some of our most effective methods for reaching people and getting their input? And so this will be something that we'll be working on this for a while, because we're using it for those dual purposes, to get people's input and also to test out some of the ways that we seek people's input. So that's what I've got. Thank you.
Great. Then we'll go right into our next item on our agenda, which is the approval of today's agenda. Can I get a motion, please?
John O'Callahan, move approval.
Second, Joe Downing.
Been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
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 Is there anyone opposed? Then the motion carries. So we have today's agenda. The next up is the approval of the meeting notes for May 12th.
Move approval, John O'Callahan.
Can I get a second?
Second from Pete Komet.
Been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion?
This is Kevin Pessinger. Request, move to request a correction to reflect my attendance.
Oh, sorry about that. Looks like we will
I
make
was
that.
late, but I was there the majority of the meeting.
Great. Well, we will make that correction. So with that one correction, all in favor of that motion signify by saying aye.
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 Is there any opposed? And the motion has been approved with that one correction. We're at the public comment period, but we didn't receive any prior public comment. So we will go to the Transportation Policy Board second vice chair nomination. I'll turn it over to Karen.
Okay, thank you. You'll remember that recently you amended your bylaws to make a number of changes, some technical, some more substantive. This is the result of one of the more substantive changes that you made, and that was to create a third leadership position on the Transportation Policy Board, the position of second vice chair. The other piece was that we would basically move to what our regional council does in nominating people, that we would provide an opportunity for people to nominate in advance in writing, so that all of the nominations do not have to happen in the meeting. And the discussion around these changes was centered a lot on some of our conversations about equity. How do we make a place at the table for more people? How do we make it maybe a less embarrassing process to be nominated in a meeting, or to have not had an opportunity to think about it if someone's going to nominate you? And so today we are coming for action. Mr. Chair, we have received 2 nominations in writing prior to the meeting, and both of them were nominating Olympia Representative Danny Madrone for the second vice chair. we can take nominations from the floor as well.
Are there any other nominations for second vice chair? Are there any other nominations for second vice chair? Are there any other nominations for second vice chair? I will close nominations.
Sounds like the train is moving out of the Port of Olympia right now, doesn't it?
Then it's been Danny Madrone from the Olympia City Council has been nominated for second vice chair. All those in favor of that nomination signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Aye.
Is there anyone opposed? And Danny Madrone, welcome to be our first second vice chair of the Transportation Policy Board.
You see y'all, hashtag honored.
Look forward to working with you. There's lots of work to be done, so it's really good that we get to spread it around a little bit more and get some more input. So looking forward to it. Next on our agenda is a regional transportation improvement RTIP update. So going over to Mary or Sarah.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Sarah Porter, and it's been a little while since I've got to address the council. Good morning. I'm a planning assistant here at TRPC, and this agenda item is to review a proposed amendment to the 2021 through 2024 Regional Transportation Improvement Program, the RTIP. And as a reminder, the RTIP is a 4-year list of transportation projects, which is updated annually. And in between those updates, when certain kind of changes are made to the RTIP, they need to go through an amendment process. And that's for federal requirements. This amendment has been requested by the city of Tumwater to delete the project Israel Road and Linderson Way pedestrian and bicycle improvements, phase 2, from the 2021 and 2024 RTIP. Initially, this project was split into a phase 1 and a phase 2 due to the amount of grant funding that was available. Now, TRPC and Tumwater have worked together to align the funding so that it can be accomplished as one project, which is called Israel Road and Linderson Way pedestrian and bicycle improvements. Throughout this process, public comment was solicited on TRPC's website, and TRPC did not receive any public comments. And we also asked for, and we also had the opportunity to give TRPC council the opportunity to comment, and there were no comments as well. If anyone has any questions, we do have City of Tumwater staff available.
Are there any questions? I think this is the first one for me where we changed it from 2 phases into 1 phase, and we already have the funding lined up. So I see something new all the time when on this stuff. So well, I think it's a big congratulations to the city of Tumwater and TRPC to have all this funding lined up and get into 1 phase. And so it obviously makes a lot of sense to delete the 2nd phase. Do you need a motion?
Yes.
Again, motion, please.
This is Pete. I would move to approve removing the City of Tumwater project Israel Road and Linderson Way pedestrian and bicycle improvements phase 2 from the 2021 to 2024 Regional Transportation Improvement Program.
This is Carolina. I second.
It's been moved and seconded. Is there any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor of the motion signify by saying aye.
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 Is there anyone opposed? That motion carries.
Thank you, everyone. Appreciate that support.
Thank you.
So now we're on to the Regional Freight Strategy grant application. Spina?
Yes, good morning. So I'm Vina Tappet, the Deputy Director here at TRPC. And one of the things that you've asked us over the years is to look for additional sources of funding to fund specific projects. And when we talked to you about the Unified Planning Work Program, our UPWP, a few months ago, one of the things that you expressed interest in was our regional freight strategy, which was one of our unfunded needs. And it's been identified as an unfunded need for quite a few years. About a month ago, a little bit over a month ago, a grant opportunity came across our desks. It's called the RAISE grant. If you're familiar with the federal funding program Tiger or Build, this is the third rendition of that. It's essentially the same program, and it funds a lot of transportation infrastructure, large projects across the country. It's a very competitive funding pot, and for the first time since I think 2013 or 2014, they are looking for planning projects as well as large infrastructure projects. We took a look at our unfunded need projects and decided this was the one that was probably likely to be the most competitive in their funding criteria. And so we started to put together a grant application. I'm here today just to tell you what we think will be in the grant application and pick your brains to see if we're missing anything. So this is really using you as a resource to get a more robust and well-rounded grant application. Many of your organizations are partners and have already sent partnership letters to us, which we very much appreciate. There's others still coming. We're looking at, there's no match required on this one, which is fantastic for us. And the applications are due by July 12th. Then we'll hear in the fall, and then the project, if funded, will start about a year from now. So some of the things, the project that we think a freight study should address, infrastructure bottlenecks is the first one, pretty obvious one. Reliability for freight is a very important economic consideration for our region. And so we're looking at our major freight corridors as well as access to our marine and airport, certainly I-5, things like that. We would also be looking at adoption of new technologies and best practices. We, if you're following the news on autonomous vehicles, trucks are leading the way. And so we expect those changes to be coming, and we want as a region to be prepared for what we need to do to support that. We also will use this as an opportunity to collect data on freight for projections and maybe enhance our modeling and things like that. We would look at supply chain issues, especially around the first and last mile. Another big aspect in our region is freight security and safety and resiliency. Lots of stuff is packed in there. Safety, we've seen an uptick in truck accidents, for also train derailment. If certain, like our wellheads are vulnerable to train derailments, especially if there's hazardous material. But another really large aspect of this is there are detour routes, and making sure our detour routes are robust and resilient and able to take freight traffic. We've got some load restrictions, we've got some bottlenecks, things like that. So there's a whole bunch packed in here. And we have quite a few partners with the emergency services type of partnerships supporting this grant proposal. Another thing that was identified in the regional economic strategy that the EDC led, and really high priority for some of our members, is looking at our industrial land inventory. And we would be looking at it with a specific lens here for freight related land uses. Under safety, I also forgot about parking. Freight parking, truck parking is a huge issue across our state. So that could relate to land use or safety. And then I talked a little bit about first and last mile, but how do we accommodate freight in our vibrant urban centers and corridors? A lot of our truck routes, Martin Way is a truck route. We're also looking at that to, it's our major transit route. It's got so many uses, and how do we kind of keep the land use robust and really supportive of our economic development, but also keep freight moving through there. So a lot of things to talk about there. And we expect this to have a steering committee of land use planners and transportation planners and other interested stakeholders. Really well-rounded look at freight in our community. And then a big focus of this grant and its eligibility, I don't want to say points because I don't believe they're using points, but is how is environmental justice and equity looked into this? And so big focus for us will be truck travel and vulnerable users, access to freight for disadvantaged communities, things like that. And then also links for environment linking to our climate mitigation plan and how can freight, and we know transportation is responsible for about 40% of our greenhouse gas emissions. So what can we do around freight to reduce our greenhouse gas emissions? So I ran through a lot of stuff. I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm just going to start listening to you and your thoughts.
I'll open it up to the floor. Is there any thoughts on this? Pete?
Two thoughts. You didn't specifically mention the 93rd interchange on I-5, and we know that we've got one truck stop with a lot of truck traffic, and we're about to have a second, as well as a large warehouse out in that area. So I think that would be one thing to look at. There's also a little more obscure, but there's a pipe company out on the west side of Tumwater that has a rather awkward truck access that comes in, ultimately comes into Israel Road. And it would be a lot more convenient for that area. This is a company just south of the BPA power station area, if they had access to Trosper Road. So I think, and there's other industrially zoned land in that area that would be able to take advantage of that connection if it were there. So, but looks like you've got Tumwater Boulevard, the Newmarket Industrial Campus area. So those are the only other things I could think of in terms of potential bottlenecks.
Thank you.
I guess the only thing I'd be really interested in is we've done quite a bit of work around freight in Northeast Lacey, and we have a freight corridor, and we've done some work. We put it in that roundabout, and I'm sort of curious on how that's working. Like, is it working as intended? Is there anything we can learn from that? Things that maybe other communities should do different, along those lines. But we have all those warehouses back there. It probably receives more freight, traffic than any other place in Thurston County. So I'm just curious if that's sort of working as we hoped it would work after we've done some improvements.
Okay, great. I can try to work in something around evaluating some of the more innovative things we've done and see how they're working.
Danny has her hand up.
Oh, Danny, go ahead.
Hi, I just want to make sure that in environmental impacts, we're looking not just at climate change issues, but also tires. We all have tires on our cars. Trucks have lots and lots and lots of tires, and there are, we recently learned there are chemicals in those that are killing salmon. So if we could add that in there, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I guess at the end of the day, go ahead, John.
You were asking about your area where there's a whole lot of traffic. It starts up about 4 o'clock in the morning, and I don't know when it ends, what time it dies down. But when you start getting around midnight, 10 o'clock, midnight, you'll have a few trucks that come through, not very many. If you could increase that traffic during those hours, find a way to get those private businesses to release people during the nighttime, it's going to be a whole lot safer for everybody.
Agree with that. And so I guess that comes to a good point, Dina, which I was just about ready to bring up, is what are we hoping to do with this information? Are we going to try to push it out to the jurisdictions once we've collected it on strategies for what's the end result of this grant? What's the success of look like when this grant's over?
Yes, an action plan, so a list of strategies that will, in all these categories, that will take us in the right direction.
Okay.
Including like infrastructure projects or other type, just a comprehensive list of strategies.
Okay. Is there anything else from the floor?
Well, thank you all. That was very helpful. And all these ideas are just going to help shape. Karen and I have been talking about this. This grant application is more of a story than a point-based system. So the more we can talk about what it means to our community and the impacts, the more compelling it'll be for them to hopefully fund us.
Oh, so we get to be creative.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, sounds good. Well, then the next item that I've been really looking forward to is getting the update on the Martin Way corridor study.
Good morning, Allison Osterberg, Senior Planner here at TRPC, and I am joined today by Katrina Van Every and Aiden Dixon, and very happy to be here to give an update on the Martin Way corridor study. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Hopefully you guys are seeing that. So Martin Way is one of the critical corridors in our community. As you heard even today, pretty much every meeting, I feel like Martin Way comes up with the things that we talk about. It is a major corridor for vehicles, for people getting to and from work, home, schools, businesses. It's a major freight corridor, a major transit corridor. There's a lot of issues we're looking at in our community that are that we really see playing out on Martin Way. And so we've spent a lot of time the last year digging into the current conditions in Martin Way. We're going to talk a little bit about that. There's a lot to cover on this corridor, and we're just hitting some of the highlights here. So if you have questions about other things, there's more behind a lot of this data. But I'll give a little bit of a background on the project and some of the things we've learned in our current conditions review, and a little bit of what the future looks like. And Aiden will talk a little bit in specifics about some of the transportation trends that we're seeing. And then we'll talk a little bit about next steps. So the Martin Way Corridor Study is a partnership among Thurston County, Lacey, Olympia, and Intercity Transit, working with TRPC to develop a common vision for the Martin Way Corridor, as well as identify policies and potential projects that we would need to support that vision. And we're really looking at a mix of land use and transportation issues and how those things come together. Funding for this is coming from a federal surface transportation block grant with matching local funds from those partners. It's a long corridor, Martin Way, and the focus for this project is the extent from Martin Way coming from where it starts near State Avenue out to Marvin Road. So that's kind of 1 through 4 on this map. But as we started doing the current conditions report, when we looked at that section of Martin Way between Marvin and Meridian Deutero, there's a lot of changes. If you guys have driven on Martin Way lately, there's a lot of growth and things that are happening in that section. And so this current conditions report includes that area because it is affecting the corridor as a whole. Because it is a long corridor, we did need to break it down into these sections. So we use them sometimes when it's convenient for us. You'll see that in some of the data we have, but it's just a way to wrap your head around what's going on in the corridor. As I mentioned, kind of over the past year, we've been digging into different data sources, looking at current conditions. We did 2 surveys, survey of residents and users of the corridor. We worked with the Economic Development Council to do a business survey. And we're wrapping all that up in a current conditions report that's coming out shortly. And right around now, we're shifting to do an opportunities and alternatives analysis. We've brought on 2 sets of consultant teams to help us with some of that technical review. And they'll be helping us with a market study and looking at some of the land use options in the corridor, as well as a transportation operations analysis to identify some transportation alternatives. And we'll be working on that through the summer and most of the fall. And that'll be leading into the development of identifying, what's our preferred alternative for the corridor and an action plan to support that. And that'll be coming out next year. So currently the vision for the Martin Way corridor, and this is sort of amalgamated from things that have been said by the 4 partners on the corridor, is that Martin Way be an attractive, mixed use, high density area, mixing residential and commercial uses where people walk, shop, work, live, and really enjoy spending time. And something that comes up a lot is in these descriptions of Martin Way, the vision is that over time it will transition from an automobile dominated use to more pedestrian friendly streetscape, where we see more bicycling and support for high capacity transit. So that's sort of the vision that our jurisdictions have. In practice, what we see in Martin Way is that there are some elements of this vision that occur on the corridor, but overall, we're not quite achieving this vision, even though those statements have been in place for many, many years. We do see that the corridor generally is pretty auto-dominated. It is more intimidating for use by other users. We are seeing more high capacity transit on the corridor, but I think one thing we've seen in this current conditions report is that if we want to achieve that vision, we may need to do things a little bit differently than we've done in the past in order to really see the type of development on Martin Way that is outlined in those vision statements. So bring it back a little bit, who lives on Martin Way? The population of the corridor and all the statistics I'm going to show here reference that full corridor all the way out to Meridian, Diderot, kind of that full section. So it's about 9,000 people live on the corridor. A higher proportion of them are renters. Also, when you look at residents of Martin Way compared to Thurston County or Lacey Olympiana as a whole, a greater proportion of them are cost burden, are lower income. About 20% of residents are considered severely cost burden, which means a combination of their housing and other costs is a pretty high proportion of their income, and they may be struggling to kind of meet their needs and do what they need to do, which is higher than we see in the region as a whole. And the people who live on the Martin Way corridor, it's a really diverse corridor. We have a higher proportion of people of color, higher proportion of people who speak languages other than English, who were born outside of the United States, but also who have ties to different immigrant communities, but are US born. And there's just there's so many different types of people who live on Martin Way, and it's a really diverse area. One thing we saw across the board with our residential survey, we asked people what they like most about living on Martin Way, and access comes up first. Access to stores, to the highway, to shopping, to restaurants, just easy, convenient access to the variety of things you can get to on Martin Way. Who works on Martin Way? So it's also a major economic driver. There are just over 1,000 businesses on Martin Way. We had the EDC do a census of businesses along the corridor, and employment is about 13,400 people. Maybe when you think about Martin Way, you think about some of the big box stores that are there, but actually the majority of businesses on Martin Way are small. More than 50% of them have fewer than 5 employees. And the top industries across the corridor, we see retail distributed, and then a big concentration of healthcare and health services that are concentrated right around the Lily Road intersection. In our survey of businesses, we asked them what's working well for them along the corridor. Parking availability, plenty of parking on Martin Way. They think pedestrian access is working well, and transit access for the most part. We'll hit on an exception to that later. And overwhelmingly, the current businesses on Martin Way say that access by car is something that's important to their business success, more so than other modes. When we look at land use, current land use on Martin Way, it's really diverse. There's a mix. About 80% of the corridor is developed, but most of it is at lower intensities, despite our vision of having kind of a high density corridor with a real mix of housing and commercial. What we see is that housing and commercial is pretty divided. We have a mix of lots of low intensity commercial, and some of it dating back to when Martin Way was originally opened in the 1930s. We see a lot of kind of lower density residential just off the corridor in neighborhoods like Tanglewild and Thompson Place are pretty typical. And we see some new development that's coming in there where we're seeing more multifamily development, more apartment buildings that are coming in. There is a fair amount of that on the corridor, but a lot of it is newer. And there are a fair number of areas like you see down at the bottom of, again, large parking areas that are potentially could be creatively reused at higher intensities in the future. About 20% of the corridor is open space. Martin Way crosses 3 streams, Indian Creek, Woodard Creek, and Woodland Creek. And so there are some significant environmental issues along the corridor. There's some major wetlands. There's some areas that are not developed and so are lacking some infrastructure because they have environmental issues and so they haven't been developed, and so they don't have some of the facilities we see in other areas. And there are, concerns about contamination from stormwater runoff from Martin Way into these sensitive areas. So those are some of the considerations for land use that we looked at in this project. For transportation, I'm going to turn it over to Aiden to talk about some of the highlights that we've seen in our review of transportation conditions.
Thank you, Allison. Hello, everyone. My name is Aiden Dixon. I'm an associate planner here at TRPC. I'll be talking more about transportation issues along Martin Way. Let's begin with safety. Safety is a very important issue, obviously, to everyone on the board here and to the public at large. Martin Way has challenges with safety, specifically, with bikes and pedestrians, but also in vehicles as well. What you're looking at now is a map of severe and fatal collisions along the corridor from 2015 to 2019. There are approximately 29 collisions resulting in a serious or fatal injury on Martin Way. There are some clusters that we can see on the west side. I believe it's Woodard Creek, or maybe it's Woodland Creek. We see that there are clustering that is present, specifically on the west side, like I mentioned before, lacks sidewalk infrastructure. So that we do see some fatal bike and pedestrian crashes. However, the corridor is not immune. It's not just in one area. We see pretty consistently that there are numerous safety issues, specifically with regards to people unfortunately losing lives along the corridor. Okay. Next, we can look at a specific type of collision. It's called an entering at an angle collision. That's pretty self-explanatory. What we see here is basically one vehicle perhaps exiting or entering off of Martin Way onto Martin Way and coming into contact with another vehicle from an angle. So not head-on or sideswiping. As we can see, there are a lot of clusters that we along the corridor, specifically in areas along Pacific and Lilly, on Sleater Kinney and Martin. And then there's a third cluster present in the Tanglewild Thompson area, or Thompson Place region. These collisions, while not 100% correlated to ingress and egress or maybe like driveways, perhaps there is a strong correlation between the two. So access management is something that has been indicated as a very important issue, just managing people coming into and out of Martin Way. I don't know if everyone has had a chance to drive down the corridor, but as you can see, if you look to your left and to your right while you're driving down, there are many different driveways that provide important access to businesses. These are very critical use paths for businesses and people that are driving on an auto-oriented corridor. They're definitely important that we provide enough room and opportunities for people to patronize these businesses along Martin Way. However, do realize that perhaps there is an issue where perhaps too much access or perhaps not enough signalized or informative access would cause people to unfortunately collide with each other. So something we're taking a look at. Sidewalk infrastructure is something that has also been indicated as very important to both residents of the corridor and people that visit. People who are taking the bus, as we'll talk about in the future, oftentimes will get off and there will be no adequate sidewalk infrastructure for them to use to get to their destination. Two areas circled in red on this map that do not have any sidewalk infrastructure are over the creeks or streams or water features over Martin Way. The green colored shows the density of sidewalk infrastructure. So the darker green you're seeing, the more sidewalks there are. As you can see, there are two notable gaps. However, I think it's also important to mention that there is a lack of sidewalk infrastructure in areas immediately adjacent to the corridor. So the connectivity and presence is also an issue. So we can look at whether sidewalks are there or not. And we can also take a look at whether sidewalks actually connect pedestrians to destinations that they would like to go to. So in both of these areas, we are seeing some challenges, and there's definitely some room for improvement. Transit is extremely important along Martin Way. Intercity transit is consistently mentioned and identified Martin Way as being critical corridor to its network. It's its most important transit corridor. I believe it accounts for approximately 14% of the agency's revenue service hours and 7% of its system-wide ridership in 2019. Intercity Transit's making major capital and service investments in the corridor, and is a very intensely planned future for the corridor, and especially envisioning Martin Way as as being a very important service corridor for it into the future. There's also most notably its BRT demonstration project. The one is running up and down Martin Way, a 5-year zero fare demonstration project, is also has also been implemented as well. So we see Martin Way both now and in the future being very important to IT's transit service. Right now, we're taking a look at a map depicting a 2045 level of service. So to explain it another way, we're looking at congestion, perhaps a better way to describe it along the corridor. It's important to remember that these projections or these forecasts for 2045 include our funded projects. So projects that have money has been allocated and identified for them. So they're very likely to get built. There are also projects that are included in the RTP. These are not reflected in this map. So as you can see in 2045, even with the projects that have currently been identified with funding, there is going to be increased levels of congestion along Martin Way and in the region, generally speaking. A, B, and C generally have no issues, but as we move down to rankings of D, E, and F, as you can kind of understand, there's increasing levels of congestion, specifically along the interchanges or at the exit for I-5 on Martin Way, and generally speaking down at Tanglewald and Thompson Place. So, we've been talking about Martin Way as an important corridor, and I think that, all the information we have shows us this, but this is also just something really important to understand, is that Martin Way will grow, whether we like it or not, whether we plan for it or not. Martin Way is going to continue to grow into the future and become more important. So it's very important that we get ahead of that as planners and as members of this council. So we did a public outreach to corridor residents, and among the questions that we asked were what As we plan together for the corridor, what do you think is the most important? So identifying top priorities for people that live on Martin Way. You know, we understand there are a lot of challenges in the corridor. We wanted to get a better idea of what the actual residents who live on the corridor and experience it every day, what do they see and what do they want? As we can see, safety for all users, improving safety for all users was identified as a top priority, understandably. If you've been driving down Martin Way, it can feel very unsafe, even if you're in a vehicle, but especially if you are not in a vehicle, if you are a bicyclist, if you are a person with disabilities, if you're a person who's walking, it can feel very scary. So improving accessibility for people with disabilities is very important as well. You have folks that may be using transit to get to places, and lack of curb cuts or inconsistently level pavers, or these kinds of things that really would prevent folks that are differently abled from either crossing the street, like we said, like we see in the third priority, or for just moving along the corridor as well. And finally, our third priority for residents was increasing places to safely cross Martin. There are a number of crosswalks on Martin, most notably at those major intersections. However, it can be quite a distance, especially for someone who has mobility issues, if they're older, if they have children, to be able to, for instance, get off a transit stop and then walk thousands of feet down to a signalized intersection. So especially if a place that they're intending on going to is mid-block. So trying to cross Martin Way is just a consistently challenging issue, and people that don't cross at the crosswalks are putting themselves in danger because of the high speeds, and perhaps it's at dusk or at night with improper lighting or inadequate lighting. So all these things together kind of create a situation where even if you are, but especially if you're not in a vehicle, it can be a very dangerous place. We also talked to businesses, not just residents. So the businesses, we asked them a number of questions. However, we're going to talk with you guys about specifically the question related to areas of improvement. So we talked to businesses and asked them what areas they could, or areas on Martin Way that would use or could use the most improvement. They identified a number of issues. The most important ones to them were left turn safety, people in vehicles that are attempting to access businesses off of Martin Way and are turning left. We have center turn lanes, but sometimes without those center turn lanes, or even with them, it can be challenging for folks to get into and out of those businesses safely, and oftentimes it results in those entering at angle crashes that I talked about previously. Traffic conditions in general, whether that's related to signal timing or other issues, they see generally congestion and I would say ease of use, thoroughfare as being something that could be improved. So that's definitely something to keep in mind. Things like landscaping, lighting, and parks and paths, these more kind of like an amenity focused or kind of a physical site-oriented kinds of things with regards to the Martin Way's condition, how it looks to people that are driving by or walking. Better landscaping and lighting and parks and paths would make Martin Way a more attractive corridor. People might use it more. People might feel safer on it and feel like it's a place to not just move through, but to actually spend time on and in. So to the extent that it would allow or make customers feel more likely to spend more time at businesses or around businesses on the corridor, as opposed to driving and then immediately exiting. And then finally, access by bus. This is important to recognize. This is on the eastern section only. The eastern section of Martin Way, specifically Meridian Diderot area, is experiencing rapid growth in terms of residences and businesses over the past few years. And access by bus has been identified as an important feature. A lot of folks use the bus to get to businesses on the eastern section, and businesses have seen that going on, and they would like more improvements to a bus, or like ease of use with regards to transit, so that their customers would be better served getting to their business. I'm going to turn it over to Allison with our key needs and next steps for the corridor.
Right, so we, all that data that we looked at for the current conditions report, all that information we got from residents and businesses along the corridor, as we move forward to looking at alternatives and opportunities, we identified these key needs. So first and foremost is improving safety for all users and all different modes along the corridor. Secondly, support for inclusive growth. Our growth projections are, I think we were presenting to you guys about buildable lands last meeting, I think that was. So we have a vision in our region to see dense urban growth, particularly along our corridors like Martin Way. And as that happens, what we know is currently Martin Way is one of the more affordable places to live in Thurston County. And we want to make sure that we're able to achieve that growth, but do it in a way that doesn't displace the communities that live there. And that it's done thoughtfully in a way that maintains those affordable housing options. I think it's going to be really critical that we find ways to look at how we're balancing the needs of different users. If we're in the future, if Martin Way continues to be a major access route, a major freight route, a major transit route, and we want to increase access and comfort among pedestrians and bicyclists, how are we going to balance those different needs, and how are we going to identify where they may come into conflict and make sure that we're getting the best kind of outcome for the whole suite of users in the corridor. We'll also be looking for ways to increase connectivity. Martin Way, I think as you heard, it's a major connecting route in our community, but it can also be a dividing line. It's hard for people to get across. There aren't a lot of other options if you're trying to go east-west aside from the highway and Martin Way. And so making sure there are easier ways to connect in that region to help ease congestion, but also let people get where they're going. We'll also be looking for ways to improve continuity across the corridor. Martin Way runs through 3 different jurisdictions, and they all have slightly different standards and guidelines for how development happens on the corridor. And so we want to find ways, particularly if we're looking for a consistent transit corridor, a consistent look and feel for the corridor for people to recognize it, that we find ways to allow for that continuity while still preserving the individual character of different jurisdictions and meeting their needs. And finally, we'll be looking for ways to build a sense of place on the corridor. Martin Way is a roadway that people use often on a daily basis, multiple times a day to get where they need to go. But it's not a place that people generally, and what we hear in the survey, people go to hang out, to linger, that they enjoy being at. But there are ways that we could look at highlighting some of the amenities on Martin Way, some of the benefits that it brings to the community and making it a better place in our community. As we move ahead, looking at specifically around transportation alternatives, some of the things we'll be looking at are ways to, again, emphasize the importance of the transit corridor. That could be transit signal priority, dedicated lanes. How are we going to move transit efficiently through the corridor? Access management, as you heard, is a major issue. So how can we better control that access to businesses that improves safety, but also allows for access to businesses? We'll be looking at different types of intersection improvements, and we'll really be looking at ways to build out the pedestrian and bicycle network. And that can include filling some of those gaps in the sidewalk network, identifying better areas for crossings, and also looking at things like protected bike lanes and shared use paths for ways that might make traveling along Martin Way a little more comfortable for people who are not traveling in car. So our next steps, we've been wrapping up this current conditions review, and we're going to be kicking off an online open house later this week. That'll run for about a month. So the online open house will be a story map. It'll be online. It's a way for people to sort of go in and interact with, poke around at different parts of the corridor and see some of these things that we showed and some different things as well. And as part of that online open house, we'll be having a virtual public meeting on June 23rd. Well, there'll be a presentation, but also an opportunity for folks to ask questions of the project team. And as I mentioned, we'll be kicking off or continuing to work on our alternatives analysis through the summer and into the fall, and then moving toward developing an action plan later this year and into early next year. And so we'll come back and brief you guys again as we have some of those alternatives. And with that, I will end it there and take any questions.
Can you stop sharing your screen, please?
Yep.
I think, Doug, you're on mute though.
Okay, thank you. I got a couple of considerations. I saw this presentation before and it's an excellent job, but one thing I think it needs to deal with is Martin Way's role as an alternative to I-5. For example, I go out Martin Way a lot. I usually get off the freeway there at the parking lot and go on up Martin Way as an easier way to get in the backside of Hawks Prairie, go to Winco and so on. So that's one role that I think needs to be looked at. And I don't know whether a lot of other people use it as an alternative to the freeway or not. And of course, obviously the freeway's in trouble, or those intersections up at Marvin Road are a problem. It's a better road to take, frankly. The other consideration that I'd like to see in here a little bit more is, what is the zoning for that area? And is the zoning is the zone so that it can carry out whatever the comprehensive plans are that the city and the two cities have for that area? I think that's an important factor, because if the zoning problems are preventing the kind of development you want to see, obviously that's one of the reasons why it's not happening. So those are my two considerations.
Do we know that the zoning right off the top of our head is it continuous zoning, Martin Way corridor zoning? I know that we have it designated that in parts in Lacey, but you know if that's
I didn't highlight the zoning in this presentation, but most of Martin Way is zoned, both the Olympia part and the Lacey and Lacey UGA parts, as a high density corridor. There's like a special zoning for it. And what we're seeing in our review is that the zoning is not the barrier to the development. We're not all the way through that review yet, but for the most part, what is permitted on the corridor through zoning is high density mixed use development. But that's not the type of development we're typically seeing on the corridor. And there are other market conditions that are probably a bigger factor than the zoning. I'd say that, there's probably more to come as we look at that alternative analysis, but I'd say that our first review of that is that it's not the zoning that's providing a barrier.
Okay, that's good on that.
Don?
I thought it was a great presentation. Thank you. And obviously Intercity Transit is vitally interested in what comes out of it. I wanted to make one clarification. Some of you may not know, at least, BRT is short for Bus Rapid Transit. It's our effort to begin to model an approach that's being used elsewhere in the country to basically attract riders who may not want to ride through 20 stops to get from where they are to where they want to go. And obviously Martin Way is a big part of what we're trying to do there. Great presentation. Thank you.
Appreciate that. Pete?
Yeah, first of all, yes, I would agree. Great presentation, interesting information. I had no idea there were that many accidents that occurred along that piece of road. It's a little frightening, frankly. I'll have to think about that next time I drive that piece of road. But my question is the congestion map that you showed. I know that in some areas of Tumwater, we've just had to accept higher levels of congestion. Are those levels of congestion consistent with the transportation plans, or are they exceeding the transportation plans?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. So Martin Way is designated as a strategy corridor, which means that it can exceed level of service. So congestion is, even though we are likely to see higher levels of congestion under future conditions, it doesn't mean that we're still meeting the standards. You know, you can reach a higher level of congestion. I think it's still a fair question though, but what is an acceptable level of congestion when we're talking about Martin Way, how well it's functioning for people on the corridor and what people's expectations are. I think Doug DeForest brought up a good point. I think a lot of people do use it as an alternative to I-5 on a regular basis. And this ties in a lot with the I-5 work, with a lot of other work that we're doing. But what happens with that balance between Martin Way and I-5 as we continue to have more people living along this corridor? If it really becomes congested, does it still continue to function as that major connector when I-5 is backed up? So I think that's when we're talking about trying to balance those uses. Even if you're not really failing level of service, is it what is the acceptable level of congestion?
And it's also worth noting, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say 2 follow-ups to that is, I don't know if your map reflects the new overpass at the the Hawks Prairie area, but that's been an amazing improvement to the congestion in that area. And the second part of this is, I thought there was a plan for the congestion at 109, and so is that already planned in, or what's going on there?
Eden, do you want to hit on that, kind of what's included in that map?
So yeah, sure. So what's included in that is the projects that have only projects that have received funding right now are included in that. So projects that are in the RTP or projects that haven't received full funding yet, that they may receive portions of funding, but they're a little bit too far out, is not reflected in that map. We do have a full build map that is present in the that we have been floating around, but we felt like it was more important to show and more accurate to show only projects that were fully funded at that point. So other projects might be floating around, and they definitely will have an effect, a positive effect on congestion on Martin Way. However, they're not reflected in that map yet.
And I'll add that the Martin Way interchange would be in the other set of maps, and it does have a very positive effect on reducing congestion, right, where you saw a lot of that red. And we will be integrating that in the study in the future to show you some of those improvements, but we just modeled that for the I-5 project. So
the exit 108, 109 is probably the most congested interchange we now have in Thurston County. Anyone who has taken that around, rush hour times, it backs all the way up onto I-5 and then down I-5 on that shoulder for quite a while. It's extremely dangerous. And of course, having to take a left-hand turn to get onto the freeway right there too causes a lot of congestion. So there is plans to change that with a double clover leaves so that you eliminate the left-hand turns, but one interchange at a time. Danny?
Couple of things. Another alternative route. I think Martin Way should be completely safe for bicycles to go down, and it's not right now. It's actually very scary. There's also the alternative route of Olympia Woodland Trail and the Chehalis Western Trail, and I'm just kind of curious about how that plays into this overall vision and making sure that bicyclists do know that there are alternative routes, especially until we get Martin Way super safe for bicyclists. Another thing too that I'm curious about, Andy, you previously mentioned, I think in our last meeting, about your interest in transfer of development rights for the Martin Way corridor. And I know Thurston County is planning to do a TDR summit sometime this summer. I know an email went out to staff, Allison. I saw you were included in that. It's supposed to be a staff elected official TDR summit. And I think that's something that we should be thinking about, is what we can do to enhance density in the high density corridor to preserve farmland and other areas out in the rural communities, and how that might intersect with this Martin Way corridor study.
That's awesome. You're spot on. I would love to see transfer development rights on the Martin Way corridor. That would be a total win.
Have you heard about that yet, Andy? It was Ryan Andrews at the City of Lacey who got that.
Yeah. Yes, and I'm looking forward to participating for sure.
Me too.
John, and then Kevin, I think is on. Oh, John, you're on mute.
Kevin was before me, so.
Okay, sorry, Kevin. Thanks, John.
Thank you. Just a clarifying question. When you talk about the number of people who live on and work on the corridor, how broad does that extend? Like, does it include all of the Tanglewild neighborhood or just part of it? Or just people living directly on the corridor?
It's just people within a quarter mile of the corridor. But when we did, so the number is just the corridor itself. So it's not all the neighborhoods adjacent. It's just right along Martin Way, and a quarter mile on either side. For the surveys, though, we did the residential survey went out wider. We did kind of try to encompass everyone who might be in the wider network on Martin Way.
Okay, thank you.
And John.
Okay. Just touching on some of the safety stuff. I drive on that road almost every night. At nighttime, it's real hard to see the lines on the road. When it's raining, it's almost impossible. In the daytime, it's not bad, especially on a nice sunny day, but let it start raining and it gets really hard to see those lines. One of the first things I think that needs to happen to make people feel safer, both drivers and pedestrians, is to at least get those lines so that people could actually see them. Because I've seen people just drift over in a lane because I know they couldn't see the lines on the road. And if it wasn't for some of the bumps that are out there, you know, the little bubbles that are out there, I'm pretty sure that they'd have just stayed there because they felt them on their tires. And I've caught myself doing the same thing. Another thing is, and this one, it might be extremely cost prohibitive, but at nighttime, about, I guess after midnight or so, the lights start, you have your major spots on the road where you have red lights, and those are regular, red, yellow, and green. But all the way through until you get to one of the major spots, you just have a flashing yellow. I think maybe during the daytime, to help get people to see that stop better, if you can get that red light to flash 3 times before it hits solid, it'll catch people's eyes better so that they see that light, and there's less of an excuse for them to not start slowing down and stopping for that light. Just an idea. I don't know how cost prohibitive that would be. Maybe it's just a computer glitch or something like that you can do. Just a couple of ideas.
So to give you just a quick update, this is I've lived right off this corridor, for most of my life. And so it has always been a pretty scary corridor for traffic. There's so many ingresses and egresses all the way down it. And then as traffic increases, you're trying to get across, several lanes when you're taking a left or a right. And so that it's always been pretty scary. And I've received a lot of complaints for Lacey. There was only a flashing yellow to turn into the Costco area off of Martin Way. And this is something that I've received complaints time and time again, because it's so hard to get through that yellow light because there's so much traffic on Martin Way. And so you'd be stuck there out in the middle of the intersection, and you have to basically wait till the light turns red, then before you take the left. And so this was something that I've been begging for us to get a green arrow there to stop that traffic. And finally, just within the last week, we have that installed. And so that will greatly improve the safety there. It was probably when it comes to traffic, it was one of my bigger complaints I received on a regular basis there. And so we finally we're able to convince the traffic guys on our side that, we really need to get that in there. So that shows that you'll see an improvement. Is there any other? Graham.
Just an inquiry for Allison. There is development taking place on Martin Way currently and anticipated. Is it consistent with the direction we're looking for the vision for Martin Way? Or will the current developments be a problem? I'll just put it that way.
It's hard to know without talking about specifics. I think we have a mix of development that's happening on Martin Way, and I think that we are seeing more development that is in line with the vision. We are seeing more multifamily development that's coming in. We're not seeing a lot of true mixed use necessarily, although there is some. We just haven't had the market really to support that. But if you drive along Martin Way, you'll see that there is actually quite a bit of new development going up in certain sections. So, but then there are other sections where we're not seeing that type of development. And some of the constraints are, that's part of what we want to dig into. We know lack of infrastructure and the cost of upgrading right-of-ways to meet those requirements is a big barrier. There's a lot of really small parcels along Martin Way. And so doing redevelopment on a big scale is challenging. So I think there are some considerable barriers to seeing the type of development that we want to see. Our market may not right now match our vision. And so part of what we need to do is look at how we could close that gap. Right now, the type of vision that we have for the type of development we want to see on Martin Way, developers don't feel like it's quite feasible. It's getting closer. Unfortunately, that's because our housing prices have risen so much. And so it's part of what we want to look at in this project is how can we close that gap, but do it in a way that helps us achieve the community goals that we want.
Allison, if I can just add, as we're going through this market study, we're working with a consultant and did some interviews with developers, both residential and commercial. And one thing that they indicated is that that idea of having a true mixed use development, one of those barriers is the covenants that are placed on commercial property. They will often prohibit residential uses on those properties. So that's kind of one of those market barriers that exist that maybe we don't think about very much. But it impacts also the way property is developed along the corridor.
What can we do about those covenants? Is there anything we can do?
Great question. Stay tuned and we'll look into it.
Okay. Doug?
I just wanted to second O'Callahan's remarks on the importance of striping that road. You're right on, John.
Yeah. So one of the other big issues I've heard along this corridor, especially in the Lacey urban growth area corridor area, is that the uncertainty for developers with having to work with two different jurisdictions, right? That have two different design standards. It's been a big issue for a long time. I had a developer say he was really wanting to do a project, and the uncertainty of that just made him back out. And so this was an issue that after we had a joint planning meeting with Thurston County, I actually reached out to the chair, Ty Menzer, and had a conversation saying, there has to be some way that we can work together to streamline this. And we actually are in the process of seeing if we can work with Thurston County to sign a MOU where Lacey would be processing the permitting along this corridor in our urban growth area, which would solve a lot of those problems, right? So the county would still be receiving all the the taxes and everything, and the increased valuation, and Lacey would just, cover the cost for it, for the permit. And I really appreciate Carolina supporting that as well, to try and see if we can work this out. And so right now the staff of Lacey and Thurston County are working to see if we can do this. Apparently there was a time where Lacey did process some permits for Thurston County within our urban growth area. 20 something years ago, I found about this after the fact. And so it has been done before. And so we're going to see if we can help streamline that process, in which will hopefully kickstart some redevelopment if there's a little more certainty in that process. And so we'll have to stay tuned to see how that goes. But I look forward to hopefully figuring the solution out there. Is there anything else? Well, okay, that's a great report. I'm looking forward to hearing what you come up with, and I have heard about the covenants before too, and I'm not sure if there's anything we can do about that, but I know it's an issue. So let's go on to our next item. Is the modeling assumptions for the increased telework and remote access to services.
Hi, hello again. So I'm here to talk about some of the tools that support some of the planning projects that we work on, like Martin Way, like our modeling of Interstate 5 and some of the alternatives there. So it's being clear to us over the last year that things have really changed, and not with COVID, of course, but with so many people working from home and having greater access to online shopping or access to services online. And the question that has come up over and over again is, well, what does that mean for our future? Will things change? Will there be a new normal? And how are you going to include that in your modeling? And so we took a deep dive into that, and I'm going to just talk about how we're looking at updating our modeling platforms to take into account what we think the changes will be. So just a little bit of background on our models for those of you that are new or forget, because not all of you think about our models all day like I do, but we have two complementary transportation models here at TRPC. One is a bigger picture, and it's called the M model. And then another one is a little bit more fine-grained, and it can look at intersections and queuing or lineups behind intersections and that sort of thing, and give us animations. They work together, and we consider them a set of models. They have different purposes and different functionality. And they both have a base year, and then we also project out a future year. And in our future year, we look at changing things. As Aiden mentioned in the Martin Way, one of the modeling scenarios he showed you was all the projects that are funded for the future. We also can look at all the projects that are planned and funded for the future. But the other thing that we look at is changes in land use. We look at our growth projections and put those into our future year. And our current future year right now is 2045. That's consistent with our regional transportation plan. The other type of thing we might look at is how is transit different in the future model. We have in the past looked at increasing our telework participation rate, but that's where we really focused on our update this time, looking at just not only telework, but increase to online shopping and increase to services. And so it affects both our models that I'm talking about. So what we know that working from home affects more than commute trips. We often talk about commute trips in our region, and it's been a primary focus. But one thing that became very clear to us is when you stop taking your commute trips, you also stop a lot of associated trips. And one of our staff put together this nice little graphic that shows a typical travel day prior to working from home. So you would go to work, but then you might go out to lunch for a pizza place, then stop by at the school to pick up your child, and then drive home. But with a telework day, when you cut out that work trip, you might still be taking your child to school, but maybe they can bike, or you can bike with them because you're much closer to the school. and bike back, or you still might be driving, or they might take a school bus. There's lots of alternatives there. And you still take maybe your evening walk trip, but you'd be cutting out that trip at lunchtime, possibly eating lunch at home. So that's just one example of how your travel day patterns could change, but it's not just that trip to work and back that changes is the point of this slide. It's a lot of associated trips, and we needed to take those into account as well.
Not necessarily so good for that pizza place though.
Exactly, yes, yes. Okay, so another thing we know is and thankfully, the City of Olympia collects traffic counts at consistent locations. Well, they do it all the time. And so we were able to get a monthly time series from pre-COVID to last year and this year. And the same with Interstate 5. DOT also has permanent counters on there. So what we knew is this was probably taken early in March with Olympia, but the blue line is Olympia and the gray is the I-5 and US 101 counts. So we started to see a decrease because of COVID in March. In April was where we saw the maximum shutdown, where remember we all were sent home and everything really shut down. That was about a 49 to 46% decrease. And then it slowly started ticking up. And we have data through September where and the decrease was higher on our local roads than it was on the freeway, which makes sense. We still were seeing a lot of through traffic on our freeway, freight and things like that. The other thing we looked at was time of day, and this is from the September. So when we weren't in full shutdown, but we still saw some effects of COVID. Well, what we noticed is that there's two peaks of traffic typically for in a typical workday, a morning peak and an afternoon peak. Makes sense. A lot of us go to work at a certain time and come home at a certain time, with less people going into the office and more flexibility in hours. And I know we certainly at TRPC have seen our employees take advantage of a greater flexibility in hours. We're seeing less of a morning peak, but that afternoon peak still seems to be there. Overall, everything's down, but this morning peak really is quite a lot lower. And this was on I-5. So how we approached looking at, well, how are we going to model this? How are we going to simulate these effects of both COVID and then what happens after in the new normal? So the first thing we said is we have data during this pandemic. Let's take advantage of that. Let's use those traffic counts that are being collected by DOT and the City of Olympia and see if we can model to match the % reduction. And we chose to do that for those, the phase 2-3 recovery conditions. So think of September of last year through, I don't know, through March of this year. And our model, and I've got to just give a big shout out to our modeling team. We just have a great and deep team and with a lot of expertise. And we also talked to a lot of other folks throughout the region and nationally and looked at a lot of what they were saying, and we're able to think about, well, how would this affect different parts of our model and the way we model things. And so we were able to make reasonable assumptions in the model. The things we were able to look at, we talked about telework rates, and we looked at government. We also looked at other sectors, because we know government is very different from other sectors. It just in terms of, well, the way we operate. We looked at shopping trends that were unrelated to work trips. So essentially online shopping. We also looked at online access to government services, online access to other services like medical services. A lot of medical services were done over Zoom in the last year. And then of course, looking at schools and colleges. And then we modeled those and laid them into the model and looked at the difference in traffic counts versus the model volumes. This particular graph is the City of Olympia counts in the document that was attached to my staff report. We also have the I-5 counts. There's some areas that we saw a tremendous, and this is September again, September conditions. This is the State Capitol campus, and this is the somewhere near that roundabout as you come out towards I-5 here. And that's where we saw probably the biggest decrease in counts, 46% in the model volumes there. We didn't get it right in all the places, and there's a couple of reasons for that that we think that make sense, because we were looking mainly at future volumes, but overall, we were really tight. The overall average was a decrease of 19%. The Olympia was 28, and I-5 was 13. We got the model to be really reflecting those conditions. So then we said, okay, so now we've been able to simulate what happened during COVID, but we know that things are going to return to a new normal. They're not going to be like they were before. They're not going to be like they were in September or now. They're going to be somewhere in between. So we talked to our TAC, we talked to other consultants. We tried to think, really, how would everything change? We do know that compared to maybe where we were a year and a half ago, now that workers have experienced flexibility of working at home, they're saying they want to continue to do that. Surveys keep telling us, and you heard that from Kate Lister's presentation last month, there's a huge desire to be working from home or have more flexibility in your work schedule. And so the idea is we'd return to work in a hybrid schedule, not necessarily working from home as much as we have been, but certainly now that we've experienced it, most employers are saying, well, it makes sense to allow our workers to, we want to retain our workers. I mean, that's a huge priority of all people, all good employers. And so we're probably going to allow more flexibility. And you see this in training all over the place. Everyone's talking about how do we change our policies to allow for more flexibility. And shopping at home, we had already projected that would increase, but we've seen just such a rapid increase in that, and we project that'll continue. And the same with accessing services, government services and things like that. Once we've broken through the barriers of how to provide these services to the public, so there'd be no reason to go back the other way. Of course, it'll probably, some people will want to have that face-to-face interaction, so it'll be somewhere in between. So our new normal for our 2045 model assumptions is we're projecting a 9% reduction in total trips. That's going to lead to a 6% reduction in vehicle miles traveled. And that assumes, one of the assumptions there is a 40% participation in telework for government employees. So around 3/4, say that would be 3/4 employees working 3 days a week. And we know not all employees will be able to work remotely or have been during COVID. Okay, so our next steps, now that we've updated the model, we're including these updated assumptions in our ongoing planning projects. Right now, that's our I-5 study and Martin Way, and we're helping out with a rural mobility study. We are also stepping into starting to talk about conducting a household travel survey. We have funding for that. We want to wait till things settle down a little bit more. So probably talking about a year from now before we actually conduct the household travel survey. And that'll give us an indication of where we're at then. And then that'll give us a chance to tweak our models and continue to refine them. So think of this as a continuum, but this is something that we've been working on over the last few months. We just want to talk to you about it. So I'm going to stop my share and take any questions if you have any.
Any questions? Don?
Yeah, I guess what I have to say is relates to this effort and others. It's just when I got through reading all the presentations you guys were going to make today, and that I'm sort of the autonomous vehicle geek, as you all know, but talking a little more about autonomous Uber. And looking and the things and you guys are the experts, so you got to tell me when you find out what really is going to happen. But the things I've read suggest that autonomous Uber, like no matter who operates it, is going to be really change how transportation occurs. That the number of personal autos owned is going to go down because Uber is going to be so darn cheap and convenient that many people who aren't car geeks like I am are going to say, I don't need a personal car anymore. And that changes access to the transportation system. It changes demand for parking. And when you begin to talk about the 2045 transit, your planning threshold, it would seem like some point in there, you ought to be sort of deciding if that's going to be real, and if so, how you're going to model it. That's sort of what I want to say.
Yes, fantastic point. What's been stopping us on that is we don't know how the changes are going to play out. It could be like you described, it could be that everyone has an autonomous vehicle and there's a bunch of empty vehicles just driving around our system, kind of buying time and not taking up parking spaces. So it could increase traffic. And so we keep watching the literature. We keep watching our fellow organizations to see what they're thinking and keep just trying to understand what might be coming. But at this point in time, no one's really taking the leap on saying what will happen. So it's
Yeah, I understand, because I think it's going to be a while before people give up their personal cars, really realize the benefit. And when that happens, I couldn't predict any more than you can, but I just want you to be sensitive to it, because I think it's really going to have a dramatic effect, particularly when you're looking out to 2045. Thank you.
The one thing I'd add to that is participating on a lot of those forums. 2 years ago, people were a lot more bullish on how rapidly those changes were going to occur. There's a lot more conservative predictions now on how long it's going to take to get some of those technologies in place to the point where they become ubiquitous, to where like an Uber would be a primary source of transportation. So we're continuing to track it, but we're definitely seeing people's predictions in terms of the timeline for implementation of some of these technologies. People are getting a little more conservative on those predictions.
Yeah. Thank you.
And it's obviously, a lot of that goes to how dense of a city, what's the population for the city as well. I'm sure we'll see it in the larger cities before we see it, even in Thurston County. Taking it, I'm not sure if anyone's been in a driverless Uber, but I was, believe it or not, it's been 4 or 5 years ago in Pittsburgh, and it was quite an experience to see this little car come up with this big dome on the top that was, had all the controls, and you just get in it and off you go. And so it's you never know if the Uber you're calling is a driverless one or not until it shows up. So we're constantly trying to take Ubers wherever we can go so we can get one of the driverless ones, and it's a pretty neat experience. But it's true that, as electric vehicles and other vehicles start bringing on this technology, it's slowly going to hopefully also help with accident rates as well. So
yeah,
maybe a major change. Pete?
I guess the thing that stuck out for me in this study was how minor changes in the amount of traffic volumes so greatly affected the amount of congestion. We really are on that sort of that margin of all we need is just a little extra traffic, and it kicks us over to a much higher congestion levels. And I guess from an optimist point of view, you could say that, well, if we can be successful in figuring out how to get just a few more people on public transit or take alternative modes, that will really make a huge difference in the kinds of investments we need to make in our transportation, road improvements anyway. Of course, the pessimist is that we're getting a lot of growth coming down the road, and all we need is, that little additional increment of traffic, and it's going to get way worse here before it gets better. So anyway, I just thought that margin, such a tiny margin, made such a huge difference in congestion was interesting.
Yeah, you are exactly right. It's only a few spots, but boy, we're looking at those, and we're going to have to do a deeper dive into some of the strategies around them. And that has really been something that jumped out at our modeling team as well, that we're just at what I call a tipping point on some areas, or will be in the future, I guess would be better to characterize.
Especially that I-5-101 interchange, right? I mean, I remember during the COVID times where, wow, it's like there's no traffic here, this is working. And then all it takes is a little, now it's just back to like the way it was before, where there's traffic there every single day. It's crazy.
No.
And interestingly, state employees have not all come back to work. So where is that traffic being generated when you had some assumptions about state employment and the rigid times of that were impacting that interchange?
That's a good question. So the new Department of Transportation building, are you expecting everyone to be there when it opens? Or what's the timeline? Have you heard the timeline on that?
Are we talking to John? Yes.
John, yeah. Yeah, John.
The
obviously.
headquarters building on the Capitol campus, is that the one you're talking about, Andy?
In Lacey, yeah, the transportation.
Oh, our new building in Lacey. That's I'm working on that plan right now. We're expecting to be moving to have sort of up to 25% occupancy on the office building by around the middle of August. But of note is that all of our maintenance and equipment maintenance and region-wide crews are already working out of that campus. So, matter of fact, you'll see you're starting to see, I've been out there a few times, you see the bright green trucks on Marvin Road going, between the interchange and the building now. So we've got a lot of that, a lot of people working out of there today, but it's going to be a gradual return to buildings. So, Karen's observation is really interesting as well, that the whole Capitol campus, I mean, essentially, we were assuming that was a huge part of the congestion at certain times today, and they're still not there, and they're not going to be there for quite a while.
So what is 25% occupancy at the new building?
Funny you should ask. I don't have, I can't get anybody to tell me. I don't know if it's based on the fire marshal, if it's based on current numbers. That's one of the things we're wrestling with right now.
Yeah. We would love to see a tour.
Yeah.
I would like to see a tour of your building. The future workspace.
I can make that happen. I mean, we can work with you to get you out there. Some Friday would probably be the best time because we have a lot of people work 410s, especially on our crews, and so there won't be a lot of people in the crew areas, and we won't have any actual staff in there until mid-August. We've got a handful. Our reception desk is open now, and others, but we can arrange a tour.
Thank you. I mean, it'd be cool to see it virtual, just for this Transportation Policy Board to see a virtual tour. We've been talking about this project for such a long time. It's been on, a priority for this region, and so it'd just be really neat to see it.
Right. And I could certainly do that too. I can work with our communications manager if you want to put up a short virtual tour of the complex on this meeting agenda.
Yes, please. That would be really cool.
Okay.
Anything else? Anyone?
Not for this, but from the very first presentation, one of the things that you guys were talking about was parking for the rigs, the big rigs. One of the things that I've noticed is, because of the work that I'm doing now, is a lot of the parking lots that we have will not allow trucks to park there unless they are specifically there to deliver to those stores. The old Kmart, they allow trucks to go there. This would be something that the 3 different jurisdictions would have to do, is to start sitting down with those guys. Say, hey, nobody's there in the middle of the night. Why don't you let these guys stay there? They have an 18-hour drive time, and after that 18 hours, they have to shut down. I've had to chase some of those guys out of different places on multiple occasions and try to tell them where they can go. If we get some cooperation with the let's say Capitol Mall, so that they can go there. There's no facilities for them. There's nothing for them there, but at least they can sleep and shut down for the amount of time that they need to shut down before they can get back on the road. That would solve a lot of the problem that we have for these guys driving through that have to stop. Just an idea.
Yeah, thank you. Great comment.
How many extra trucks will be at the new truck stop that's coming in Tumwater? Or is it going to have quite a bit of an area for the semis to take a nap, get some sleep?
I know I haven't seen a conceptual design yet, so I don't know.
Yeah, we have heard that this is that safety issue with trucks and getting enough sleep it's a big issue. We had the association, presentation, and they brought, she brought that up as well, that we need to find more areas for them to be able to, and it makes a lot of sense, and trying to figure that out is, I think it's going to be really important as well.
Yeah, I think the challenge though in having them park in retail areas is they generally run their engines all of the time they're sitting there, and it's an enormous noise.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, but I'm talking in the middle of the night. You look at Capitol Mall, you look at the mall in Lacey, nobody's going to hear those running. And believe it or not, a lot of the times those trucks aren't running. In the summertime because of air conditioning, yeah. But I've knocked down a lot of doors where the trucks were not running because they have battery backups on the inside, which saves them a lot of money on fuel.
But I just encourage you to go down to Chehalis and the big truck stop there, or even the one in Tumwater. The noise is a roar. You get 50 trucks parked, even if a fraction of them are running, it's a loud noise.
Oh, I'm just going by the experience that I have every night, and I do know that it is loud over at those areas. So I'm not disagreeing with you. I'm just saying that maybe we can get that spread out, because a lot of those guys, they don't get there in time to get into those lots where they can do those hookups and stuff, and they're out looking for places. They'll find places on the highway, wherever they can find a place that was big enough. Well, if we can help them find the places at the malls, or anybody that's got really large parking lots where they can rest for a few hours and then push on, that might help. It'll keep them off the shoulders on the highway, because I've seen them on there.
There are also concerns about safety in the sense of trafficking and drugs and the like. And I know that the trucking industry has been working on that. In fact, they have an anti-trafficking organization as part of their association. So I think the conversations about truck parking are, there's a lot of stakeholders at the table when we're talking about them. But as we heard from the executive director of the Trucking Association, this problem is not going away, and Washington State has even more problems than other states in the truck parking.
This is just an idea.
No.
Yep. No, I totally understandable. Okay, Doug, do you have anything?
Just briefly, a couple of things. Number one is I was interested in both Mark and Vina's comments about surveys, and certainly agree that they thought that it's pretty premature to do it. They ran a future transportation survey up north, and frankly, they ran a very small volume, which they thought was adequate, but the results, I won't go into the detail, I found very disappointing, and I thought it was probably premature to run that kind of a survey. I'm going up there virtually tomorrow. There's going to be a report from the legislators, two legislators, on what happened on transportation funding. That ought to be interesting, and I'll report on that. Other than that, I have no other particular news that's unusual for that. Oh, one other thing I did want to mention. I have reported a long time ago that TRP, Puget Sound Regional Council, authorized, and they conducted a study of the airport situation for the future. They picked out 4 alternative sites, none of which included Olympia or Olympia area projects. The final report is out. I just got notice yesterday that it's available. I don't know what it says, but we're not in it, so don't worry about it.
Okay, well then I have something for the good of the order. A little bit later today, I'm going to a ribbon cutting ceremony for a traffic garden at Mountain View Elementary. Is Deanna Maddox still here? Do you know anything about this, or do you want me to talk about it? North Richland Public Schools.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Oh, the traffic garden at Mountain View Elementary, which is happening today for the ribbon cutting ceremony.
Wasn't aware that they were doing a ribbon cutting ceremony for that.
Yeah, so So Thurston, this I'll just report out. It says Thurston County has its first traffic garden at Mountain View Elementary School. A traffic garden is a miniature streetscape that allows children to practice bicycle and pedestrian skills in a safe and fun environment. They will use traffic gardens for their 4th and 5th grade bike unit to teach students bike handling and safety skills. The traffic garden will also be open to youth and families during non-school hours. The traffic garden project is a partnership between the Inner City Transit Walk and Roll Program, the Child Care Action Council, Safe Kids Thurston County, and Target Zero in the Alliance for a Healthier Generation. It's being funded by a grant from State Farm. And so this is the first of its kind, I think, in Thurston County. And so I will be there for the ribbon cutting ceremony a little bit later today. And I can I'll just
Thanks for pointing out. I'm sure, I think we were briefed on at the last authority meeting. So I think obviously Inner City Transit will be represented there too. Thanks.
They will be there. So
that is wonderful. We didn't receive any information that it was happening today or around the time. We're actually also in the process of receiving our first 3 electric school buses today, which is a kind of a big event for us. And so we've been, I was actually just had to grab a call for that. They're coming in and they're doing kind of a presentation, doing a tour. Department of Ecology will stop by and see the buses. So it's kind of a big day here for us as well. Over here getting our 3 new electric school buses. So definitely moving us into the future with technology for North Thurston.
Yeah, I think, isn't North Thurston Public Schools when they're up in full mode, move more people than even the Inner City Transit, more kids than Inner City Transit? Is that true? Yeah.
Yes, that's correct.
So that'll be interesting to see how these electric buses work then.
We're very excited. We chose 3 that in our special needs fleet as opposed to full-size buses to see how they do, how their range works. Not to mention the quietness of them for a lot of our special needs students. We really want to test the waters with that and how long their batteries stay maintained. So it's going to be a curveball for our mechanics to learn a different type of vehicle to maintain. But our district does have a couple electric vehicles already that we use throughout the district. So our charging infrastructure was not too difficult to put into place. And we've got drivers already who are trying to call dibs and want to take these electric buses and claim them as their own. So
very cool. Well, we'll definitely look forward to seeing how that works. And so, maybe once you're through part of a school year or something like that, we can get a report back on how it's going.
Yeah, absolutely. We could probably, if anybody was interested past this COVID point, we could bring them down and take everybody for a ride in them.
Yeah, that'd be really cool. Okay, well, thank you for that. Well, and with that, we have reached the end of our agenda. Our next meeting is next July on the 14th. Until then, I'll call this meeting adjourned.
Non-debatable motion.
Thanks.
Good night, everybody.